And it's a really good message, fits in well with our topic this morning. Everything indeed does change, and another word for that would be evolution. It's the 208th anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin today. He wrote this little book, the full title, the very wordy full title of which is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Published in London in 1859, and it forever changed the way we look at the world. The word evolution became a part of our everyday vocabulary, and it really is the foundation of modern science, evolution is. According to the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, here's what they say about evolution. The theory of evolution is one of the most strongly substantiated theories in modern science. It is the only scientifically accepted theory that both explains the amazing diversity of life on Earth today and provides a concrete explanation for why this diversity has changed throughout history. It's interesting because when Darwin was writing his book, according to his biographer, he described the process of writing the book as living in hell. Living in hell, because he knew what was coming. He knew it was going to turn things upside down, and of course, as soon as it was published, it was immediately condemned by the Church of England, the Catholic Church, and every other religious authority you could think of at the time. Nobody wanted to believe that human beings were descended from a common, non-human ancestor that might have resembled an ape or a monkey or something like that. You know, people who say, by the way, that evolution means we descended from the apes, and then they ask, well, why are there still apes in the world? It doesn't work that way. We descended from a common ancestor, all right? Doesn't mean that we descended from apes. You know, we're supposed to be, according to religions, we're supposed to be the pinnacle of creation, at least according to the Bible. And most people back in Darwin's day still believe that the Bible was basically a documentary describing in detail exactly how the universe was really created. And evolution challenged that idea like nothing before, and so people reacted with fear and anger. Darwin's trepidation was warranted. He knew what was coming, and indeed it came. And every so often, I like to check the statistics just to see how we're doing in this country when it comes to accepting or rejecting evolution. And the most recent information that I've been able to find was from a Pew Research poll from November of 2015, showed that 34% of our fellow Americans still believe that human beings have always existed in our present form. No evolution, no natural selection. Which means that around 64% of us accept that human beings evolved over time, as described by the theory of evolution. And those numbers really haven't changed much since 2013. But we'll see what happens over the next few years if Christian charter schools start multiplying, or we get more states trying to require that creationism be taught in public school science classes and things like that. That might well change. But unless we were raised in a fundamentalist Christian environment, I suspect that evolution has never been very controversial for most of us here today. And Unity has always embraced evolution, which was a big plus for me. One of the attractions that I found in Unity. Here's what our co-founder Charles Fillmore had to say on the subject of evolution. This is way back in 1939. And remember, back then, states were still passing laws banning the teaching of evolution in public schools. So here's Charles Fillmore. The history of mankind, in the majority of its aspects, shows a steady growth or ascent from a lower to a higher estate. In the forms of nature external to man, the same law of development is seen. Recognition of the truth that evolution in the earth is universal. Fillmore saying that the theory of evolution is at home in both the physical, tangible world and in the spiritual or intangible realm. And he was on to that almost 100 years ago, and today he is being joined by a growing list of authors, philosophers, scientists, and even theologians who agree. That's how it works. So the title I chose for today is from a book I've talked about before. It's called Thank God for Evolution, and the subtitle is How the Marriage of Science and Religion Will Transform Your Life and Our World. I like that he uses the word marriage. I think that's a good way to describe this developing relationship between science and religion, or science and spirituality. It's a description I think that works, because in a healthy marriage, two people don't lose their individual identities or strengths. They bring together that diversity and then work for a common purpose without losing their individual perspectives. That's the real power and value in a marriage. It becomes a problem only when one person decides that their perspective or their strengths are somehow more important or more valuable or more true than the other person's perspective or what they bring to the relationship. Karen and I have been co-ministers here for almost 13 years now, working together basically 24/7. People ask, well, how does that work? And I say, it's pretty easy. It really is. I don't have any secrets to give you. It works, but you've got to maintain that idea that each perspective is valuable and has a place and needs to be there in order for it to work. We've been together for 17 years. We've been working together like this for 13 years. We each have our areas of expertise: organizational development, community building, philosophy, communication, and we wouldn't still be together. I can tell you we wouldn't still be together if we couldn't find a way to blend it all into something that was complementary and coherent. That's not to say that there isn't some occasional conflict. For example, right now, Karen and I can't agree on what height setting to use on the vacuum cleaner, okay? She thinks we have low carpet. I think it's high carpet, or maybe it's the other way around. But either way, I mean, we're going to have to call in a mediator, folks, because this is a serious and emotionally laden issue here. But we're willing to do what it takes for the sake of the relationship and for the sake of our canine kids. So, all right. But seriously now, folks, getting back to this idea of a marriage between science and spirituality, we find that evolution has something very important to teach us about the things we think are important over here on the intangible side of reality, the spiritual side. Things like spiritual growth, emotional and spiritual intelligence. Just like physical evolution, there are evolutionary changes that occur in the spiritual realm, within the realm of consciousness, within each of us. And there are things that we can do to help that process along. There was a book that we worked with back in 2011 called Birthing a Greater Reality by Unity Minister Robert Brummett. And Robert was one of our teachers back at Unity Institute, and really for many years before that. And this book of his is all about spiritual evolution. He starts by pointing out that evolution as a purely physical process happens without a great deal of conscious control by us. But that all starts to change at the level of consciousness when we go within. This is the place where we start to have some control instead of just going with the flow and being carried down the rapids like a canoe without a paddle. Here's a line from the book. He says, evolution is on our side. It is the river in which our lives flow. The river moves us, whether we like it or not, but we can no longer drift mindlessly. We are at the point where we must evolve consciously. Yes, we still go with the flow, but we now influence the course of that flow. It's like evolution itself has given us a paddle, given us a tool so we can start guiding the process, or at least at the level of consciousness guiding the process. Then that's where our focus really should be in unity, because as we talked about last week, that's what we excel at. Birthing a greater reality is about something that you will hear people referring to as conscious evolution or evolution of consciousness, where we become aware of and we take responsibility for that process. So in the book, he gives a lot of practical guidelines for going about that, for becoming more involved in our spiritual evolution, our evolution of consciousness. And I'd like to talk about two of those this morning that we might consider working with maybe during the upcoming week. So the first practical guideline, he says, is to cultivate the power of attention and intention. So starting with attention. And of course, sometimes when we think of attention, what's the first thing that comes to mind? A soldier standing stiff and rigid. So maybe we could think about attention as mindfulness, cultivating a greater awareness of our internal process and our external surroundings. We develop mindfulness by being intentional about it in our daily lives. And of course, a good starting place, I think the best starting place for cultivating mindfulness is meditation, because that's where we learn how to focus our attention without letting the mind wander. A wandering mind is rarely aware of what is really going on in consciousness. Robert uses the example of anger, which is something that everyone experiences from time to time. When the anger arises, when do we catch it? How soon do we catch it? Are we aware of it arising, or do we not catch it until we end up identifying with it? And when we identify with the anger, we can become the anger and become angry. It's not inevitable that that happens. If we're aware of it, and if we refuse to identify with it, that doesn't have to happen. Huge difference between being aware of it and identifying with it. We can't be happy and identified with anger at the same time, but we can become aware of it and then choose not to identify with it. We can choose not to act on it. We can choose not to create a story to justify the anger, or try to enroll others in our story about why we're justified in being angry, and so on and so forth. Mindfulness practice helps us to become aware of all of our different thoughts and emotions without being identified with them. And of course, attention and intention, they both go together. Attention is our focused awareness. Intention is like a compass needle that points in the direction we want to go. It points to some place that we want to get to. We want our choice of direction, our choice of destination, to be conscious. And doing that might be as simple as developing maybe a short mission statement, or you could even call it an affirmation. Something like simply saying, I am positive, optimistic, grateful, creative, and kind. I am positive, optimistic, grateful, creative, and kind. Try doing that, or something like that. Try doing that despite what reality might be throwing at us at the time. And see how that might draw to you some of those same qualities that already exist around you out in the world. The other guideline for this morning is to make friends with paradox. The primitive brain, that's the part of the brain that's not as highly evolved physically as the other parts of the brain. There's this primitive brain that likes to think of things strictly in terms of black and white, either or, binary thinking. Now that's an instinct that might help us to survive in the jungle, but it's also the same thing that wants to turn everything into a weapon and wants to turn every person into either a friend or a foe. Instinct is going to be there. It's going to want to do that, which is why we have to make friends with it. We're not going to eliminate it. We're not going to get rid of it. We have to make friends with it, which means we have to work on finding a way to stop seeing life as an either-or proposition. And I have to confess that we might have a little remedial work to do in unity on this kind of either-or thinking, because we still hear talk about how we need to live in the absolute realm, that we can't trust the five senses, that the material world is an illusion, or here's my favorite, you got to get out of your head and into your heart. That stuff needs to stop. We need to evolve beyond that kind of black and white, either-or kind of binary thinking. Making friends with paradox means that we entertain the possibility of a third way, or maybe even a fourth way that takes us beyond either-or, black and white. The Buddhists are very good at this. We can learn from them. Absolute and relative, spiritual and material, head and heart are not mutually exclusive. Instead, they are opposite sides of a coin, and we need both. We need both and. I mean, why would we insist on the limitation of either-or thinking when in truth we get to navigate both realms? We get to navigate that greater reality. That's what happens when we make friends with paradox. We are literally encountering a greater reality. It opens us up to a richer and a deeper experience of life that's filled with an abundance of possibilities, not just either-or, black and white. Jesus, by the way, was a master of doing this. He would say things like, the last shall be first, the first shall be last, or if you try to hang on to life, you'll lose it, but if you let go of life, you will attain life. Had people scratching their heads because they're used to black and white, either-or kind of thinking. Now, when he says that, that doesn't mean that we should strive to be last. We can't take it literally. We shouldn't strive to be last or throw our lives away. Again, that's the primitive brain at work that tries to take everything literally. The primitive brain sees an obstacle and tries to either cut through it or tear it down, blow it up or get it out of the way. Evolved consciousness will look at an obstacle and see the other possibilities of simply going around it, over it, or maybe even under it. And the other options are there as well. Evolved consciousness sees more possibilities and liberates us from the limitation of either-or binary thinking. And I like to think that we have Charles Darwin to thank for giving us this concept of being able to evolve and guide this process. So today we say, happy birthday, Charles Darwin. That must be what he looked like when he was writing the book. But happy birthday, Charles Darwin. We are grateful for the idea of evolution and finding more ways to apply it to our lives. And we'll see you next week. And until then, keep evolving.